once Unix got real traction from the mid-70s onwards, I thought, well, it's only a matter of time. They've got to give them the Turing Award. And it happened, I think, in late '83. They were given the Turing Award jointly. I think that the formal presentation, which required a sort of little accompanying paper to go with it, didn't happen until 1984. But it really was an amazing piece of work that went with it. A lot of people couldn't understand why it was a bombshell, but it really, really is. The ACM Award is given for outstanding achievements in any area of computer science. So yes, people like Maurice Wilkes in the UK won it, people like Stephen Claney and Rabin and so on, who are all into regular expressions, Turing machines, all that kind of stuff. All this very worthy theoretical stuff has won the Turing ACM Award. A lot of us began to wonder, though, whether they might just be so impressed by Unix as a down-to-earth achievement that Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson, the two authors of it, might get jointly honoured, we hoped, because they deserved it. It was an amazing achievement. Oh, and by the way, if any of you want to know what happened with Unix and in what order, I can only point you at my fellow computerphile person, Brian Kernighan. He's written lots of books, of course, about C. He co-authored with Dennis. But this one, A History and a Memoir, I think is the one that I've dipped into most. And certainly for preparing these recent videos, because he basically, all right, he's a Bell Labs insider, there's a little bit of bias maybe, but basically he gives an unvarnished view about what happened and in what order, and why did Berkeley have to happen after Bell Labs had set the ball rolling and all this, and right on through to the breakup, and eventually you just had to have something like Linux. It was the only way everybody was going to be able to progress. So what did Dennis and Ken do, and what did Ken say in his acceptance speech, which was so remarkable? The title is Reflections on Trusting Trust. First of all, half a page full of thank yous to everybody who helped me. I'm not currently involved, late '84, in any more development work on the latest Unix. Left that to others. Version 7's been out for almost 5 years now. But what I want to do is to use this opportunity to get you all to think about something which has now come upon us. You will be clear that Dennis and I have developed C largely as a system implementation language. And what's more to the point, we have written the whole of the Unix operating system in C. Can you trust us not to have hidden something deadly inside the C that we are using all the time? And most people think, well, this view, you see, that compilers were benign. You know, they were wonderful, helpful things that enable you to get from a high-level language down to a runnable binary in terms that you could more or less understand. And we've done lots of T diagrams to explain how this works. You know, your C compiler, available as a binary, takes input statements, puts out a certain output. That's what a compiler is for. It's to provide a binary or near binary object that's easier to produce than writing at assembler code level. Everybody understands that. But backing off from all of this a bit, what Ken asked, although he doesn't make it quite as blatant as this, but if you read and reread and reread and reread this 4-page article until you've understood it all and it does your head in, the question you end up asking yourself is, have we opened a Pandora's box here? Because what Ken is saying is something like this. What happens if your compiler has been engineered to be one of the bad guys? And you think, oh my Lord, if the operating system is written in C and C is commonplace and people understand C and know how to work with it, it becomes a very powerful weapon for mucking with the operating system if you're a good enough C programmer. So basically Ken says yes. Consider the following. I may or may not have done the following. I think he actually has or did. How would you feel if I make my compiler ask of the C programmer that's flowing through it, I keep an eye on it and I say, is this person just messing about compiling up hello world so you can amaze everybody with your first binary program that says hello world? Or is it something more serious? Is this person trying to recompile the whole kernel of the operating system? Because maybe as a bad compiler, I ought to say I've got a view about this. So the first trick he says is, how do you know I'm not watching the code go by? And when I say to myself, he's recompiling me, the operating system, I intervene and put in some extra compiled source code, which allows me to get into the system and log in as super user without knowing the super user password. So I will put in an extra little bit that says, are you a super user as an ordinary user? Okay, go through the normal password mechanism. Otherwise, when I say password, if you give me, what shall we say, Sean? Abracadabra. If you say abracadabra, I open up the entire system for you. You can do absolutely everything. How would you feel about that? And then when he's got through that on part 1 of the paper, saying, how about a rogue operating system that we've propagated all over the world now? I, Ken Thompson, know the magic super password that will get me in anywhere. Some angry person has come up and says, there is bad code in your C compiler. It will let people do horrible things. And they say to you, show me the source. Now, if you're foolish, you show them the source and they see the code and that's it. But what happens, and this, for those of you who watched it, is a bit like going back to T diagrams. What happens if the thing effectively says, I'm going to squirt some extra source for the rogue code into every time you recompile the C compiler with itself? I won't put it in every program because people will detect it and will get mightily upset. But I promise you, I mean, the binary from a C compiler recompile is pretty big. I will hide in there the rogue source code in a string of characters, which if I trigger it and reactivate it, will get compiled as part of a C compiler recompilation. Are you still with me? And will always propagate itself into the programs. And you might say, well, but you'll come along with a version of the C compiler that's got that bad code and you will recompile it. And I say yes, but at the base of your T diagram is still a rogue version of you that you're using to compile yourself. Because until your new one is created, you've got no hope but to use what the company has given you or what Ken has given you. And Ken is saying, basically, if you're happy with that, am I a nice sort of person? Would I do this to you? Maybe I would. There's very good reasons that this has been described by a gentleman called Cory Doctorow, who describes it as a total effing bombshell. What it's saying is that if somebody angrily comes up to you and isn't got the senses around them and say, look, I'm going to really punch you up and kill you unless you give me the source code to this compiler and show me it's clean. So you show them clean source code and say, go on, recompile it. And it compiles, and it's fine. But then, when you run that compiled recompile of the binary, it still allows you to get in as super user. But you knock the piece of code out that enables you to go super user. You're not recompile that. The answer is it's embedded so deeply because of versions of the compiler ensuring that as you bootstrap up, you still propagate that code, even if the user hasn't said it wants it, if you see what I mean. So it's deadly because it's embedded and hidden in the binary, not in the source. You can masquerade that the source is okay. Honestly, this source corresponds to this binary. It's a bit like trying to get rid of Japanese knotweed in your garden, you know. There's always enough spores in the ground from previous that they will reinfect you. Yeah. And I suppose you might tear your hair out and say, how can I cope with this? And the answer is, and I'm going to leave it to Sean and the Computerphile organisation, tentacles everywhere, to find somebody suitable to follow me and say, this is still an issue. And in fact, I think Ken invented the word Trojan for this. He said, this thing is masquerading of, oh, I'm just a perfectly innocent C compiler. But it isn't. It's a Trojan horse. There's trapdoors in the underside of it that will let you do these awful things and enable you to, because of its self-replicating capability, will enable you to propagate forevermore. And it basically just says, consider. It's sobering.
So this was 1984, this came out?
This was 1984.
Truly Orwellian.
Truly Orwellian. The article we're pointing you by, Cory Doctorow, was published in 2020. All I'm saying is I am not part of the great Unix security industry. I know nothing. I'm just telling you what Ken did originally. But what Doctorow is saying is this is still a big, big issue, because if you consider what kind of things could you propagate using techniques like this, if you were a bad company, you could, for example, be a supplier of printer inks and start interrogating your printer and say, are you running the right sort of ink? Or is it rogue ink? Because if so, we're going to disable your print routines. Or alternatively, you've got one of these newfangled CD-ROM burners in your computer. What happens if it's made by a company that's subverted the system software in Unix in such a way that it won't let you copy rogue CDs that haven't been made with its own facilities? Stuff like that. The possibilities are limitless. Dana Scott and Michael Rabin in the late 1950s was, it is always doable. So long as you stick to simple finite state automata, don't start monkeying around with extra RAM or stack. The effect of slotting that T-diagram against here slightly downwards is to show you it can get very, very hairy.